7 teenagers from different corners of South Korea walk into a cramped dorm room in Seoul. Most of them strangers, some of them not even sure they want to be idols. That was 2010. By 2023, those same 7 men had sold out stadiums on every continent, addressed the United Nations 3 times, and turned down solo deals worth more money than most people will see in a lifetime, because none of them were willing to do it without the other 6. The K-pop industry is designed to manufacture groups. Trainees rotate in and out, members get cut weeks before debut, and the average idol group disbands within 7 years. BTS didn't just survive. They re-signed together, enlisted together, and came back together. But here's the question no one seems to fully answer. Why these 7? What actually happened in that building, in those early years of debt and empty concert halls and shared meals they could barely afford, that fused 7 completely different personalities into something the industry had never seen before? This isn't about fan theories or sentimental edits. This is the real story, fact by fact, member by member. Number 7. The kid who chose a stranger over 7 agencies. Jungkook. In 2011, a 14-year-old from Busan stood on the stage of Superstar K3, one of South Korea's most watched talent competitions. His name was Jungkook, and he was eliminated early. On paper, it looked like a dead end. In reality, it was the beginning of everything. After his audition aired, 7 different entertainment agencies contacted him with casting offers. Among them were industry heavyweights, companies with decades of track records, massive artist rosters, and training facilities that looked like small universities. Big Hit Entertainment was none of those things. It was a small company run by producer Bang Si-hyuk, operating out of modest offices with limited resources and exactly 0 active idol groups on the market. By every rational measure, it should have been last on the list. Jungkook picked it first. The reason, as he has explained in multiple interviews over the years, was straightforward. He saw RM. Kim Namjoon was already training at Big Hit, and during Jungkook's visit, something about watching Namjoon rap made the decision for him. Not the building, not the contract terms, not the brand name. A person. A teenager chose his entire future based on the presence of another teenager he had never spoken to. That single instinct would shape both of their lives and the lives of 5 others for the next 15 years. When Jungkook arrived in Seoul to begin training, he was, by every account, including his own, painfully shy. He was a middle schooler living away from his family for the first time, dropped into a dorm with older trainees already deep in their own routines and ambitions. He barely spoke. The other trainees, the ones who would eventually become BTS, noticed immediately. But instead of ignoring the quiet kid or letting him figure things out alone, they did something that set the tone for the next decade. They pulled him in. Jin, the oldest, made a point of talking to him regularly. Namjoon checked on him. J-Hope, naturally loud and expressive, dragged energy out of Jungkook in ways the kid didn't expect. Suga, dealing with his own struggles at the time, still made room to look out for the youngest trainee. V became one of Jungkook's closest companions almost instantly. And Jimin, navigating his own insecurities as a newer trainee, found a kind of parallel in Jungkook's quiet intensity. None of this was manufactured. There was no company directive to bond. These were teenagers figuring out how to coexist in a single room where 7 people slept in bunk beds and on floor mats, splitting meals that stretched the limits of what their trainee allowances could cover. The conditions alone would have fractured most groups. Big Hit was in debt. The trainees knew it. They knew the company's previous ventures hadn't gained traction, that there was no guaranteed debut date, and that the entire operation was essentially a gamble on whether Bang Si-hyuk's vision for a hip-hop idol group could find an audience in a market dominated by polished pop factories. For Jungkook, who had turned down agencies with far more stability, this was daily reality. A cramped dorm, an uncertain future, and 6 older guys who, for reasons he probably couldn't fully articulate at 14,
made it feel like exactly the right place. He has said plainly in interviews that the members raised him, not poetically, literally.
They were there when he navigated adolescence far from home, when he dealt with homesickness, when he transitioned to the School of Performing Arts Seoul while simultaneously training for a debut that might never come. They watched him grow from a kid who could barely hold eye contact into a performer who would eventually command stages in front of hundreds of thousands. And he watched them, watched RM carry the weight of leading and being the group's voice in a second language, watched Jin push through the gap between his limited training and the other's natural instincts, watched Suga fight through physical pain and emotional battles that would have made most people quit. What makes Jungkook's place in BTS critical to the group's bond isn't simply that he was the youngest. It's that his presence created a specific dynamic, a shared sense of responsibility among the older members that transcended professional obligation. In Korean culture, the Hyung-Dongsang relationship carries genuine weight. The six weren't just his colleagues, they became, functionally, his older brothers in a city far from his parents. And that collective responsibility bonded them to each other as much as it bonded them to him. Looking after Jungkook was something they did together, a shared purpose that reinforced their own connections during the hardest years. When he cried on stage during early concerts, overwhelmed by what they were building, the cameras caught the other members moving toward him without hesitation, not because anyone directed them to, but because that was what they had been doing since he showed up as a scared 8th grader. Years later, when BTS sat at the summit of global music and solo careers became an obvious possibility, Jungkook's loyalty illuminated something fundamental about the group. He had options, enormous ones, but the person who had been choosing people over logic since he was a kid watching a stranger rap in a practice room never treated the group as something to outgrow. When they announced their hiatus for military enlistment in 2022, Jungkook released solo work, explored his own artistry, and then enlisted on a timeline that kept him connected to the others. He didn't try to extend his solo window. He didn't distance himself from the group identity. He did what he had always done, followed the people who raised him, trusting that what they built together was worth more than anything he could build alone. There's something Jungkook once said in an unscripted moment, outside any managed press event or rehearsed broadcast. He said that if he could be born again, he would choose to be BTS again. That's not a pop star performing gratitude for cameras. That's a man who chose a stranger in a practice room over 7 better offers at 14, and more than a decade later still considers it the only decision that ever mattered. But Jungkook wasn't the only one whose presence in the group hung by a thread, and the next story reveals just how close BTS came to losing one of its most vital members before they ever recorded a single album. Number 6. The sunshine they almost cut before debut. J-Hope. Before Jung Ho-suk became the person BTS credits with holding their energy together for over a decade, he was a kid from Gwangju with a reputation that had nothing to do with idol music. He was a street dancer, a serious one. As part of a dance crew called Neuron, he had already won a national dance competition, and in the Gwangju underground scene, his name carried weight among people who judged movement by precision and raw skill, not by how well someone could smile at a camera. When he entered Big Hit Entertainment as a trainee around 2010, he wasn't walking into the idol world with stars in his eyes. He was a dancer who happened to land in a company that was building something centered on hip-hop and performance. What he didn't know was that the company would nearly take it all away from him before it even started. The facts on this are not rumor or fan speculation. They've been confirmed by the members themselves, most notably in the 2018 documentary series Burn the Stage and in multiple interviews across the years. Before BTS's debut in June 2013, the final lineup was still being shaped, and J-Hope was told he might be removed from the group. The reasons have never been laid out in precise corporate detail publicly, but the reality was clear. The company was reconsidering whether he fit the direction the group was heading. For a trainee who had uprooted his life from Gwangju to Seoul, who had invested years into a process with no guaranteed outcome, the message was essentially that the door he had been working toward was closing. What happened next is one of the defining moments in BTS's formation.
RM, Kim Namjoon, who was already established as the group's anchor and the first trainee Bang Si-hyuk had built the entire project around, pushed back. He advocated for J-Hope to stay. The exact conversations that took place behind closed doors haven't been transcribed for public consumption, but the outcome speaks for itself. J-Hope remained, and the members who stood alongside RM in that effort didn't just save a lineup slot. They established something that would repeat itself over and over in the years that followed. The principle that the 7 of them were not interchangeable parts in a machine, but specific people whose absence would fundamentally change what BTS was. J-Hope, for his part, had to reckon with what almost happened. He's spoken about that period with a candor that strips away the bright, high-energy persona fans see on stage. He almost left on his own terms, too. The trainee period at Big Hit was grueling, the company's financial situation was precarious, and J-Hope was a dancer being asked to become a rapper, a discipline he had almost no background in when he arrived. RM and Suga, both of whom had roots in the underground rap scene, became his teachers. They worked with him on flow, on delivery, on finding a voice that was authentically his rather than a copy of theirs. That collaborative process wasn't a casual favor between coworkers. It was an act of investment in a person they decided mattered, performed during a period when none of them had any guarantee that the group would debut, let alone succeed. When BTS did debut, J-Hope's role crystallized into something the group could not have replicated with anyone else. He was the main dancer, and his technical foundation elevated every choreography the group performed. But his contribution to the bond went far beyond what happened on stage.
Inside the practice room, he was a perfectionist, the member who ran drills on choreography until every angle and every beat was synchronized across all 7 bodies. The others have described this side of him with a mixture of respect and exhaustion. He pushed hard, and he held everyone to a standard that sometimes created friction. But that friction was productive. It meant that when BTS performed, the precision of their synchronization wasn't an accident or a product of studio editing. It was the result of hours in a room with J-Hope counting beats and correcting posture, driven by a work ethic that the group learned to trust even when it was demanding. Outside the practice room, he was something else entirely. The members have consistently, across years of content and interviews, identified J-Hope as the person who regulated the group's emotional temperature. When tension built up, during tours, during the exhausting album cycles, during the period when they were performing in small venues to sparse crowds and questioning whether any of it would work, J-Hope was the one who broke the silence, who cracked the joke, who physically forced energy into a room that had gone flat. This wasn't a character he played. People who knew him before Big Hit, from his dance crew days in Gwangju, described the same trait. But what BTS added to it was context. He was performing that role for 6 people he had almost lost, in a situation where they had almost lost him, and that mutual awareness gave his presence a weight that went beyond personality. There's a moment in Burn the Stage that complicates the public image of J-Hope as the group's permanent source of light. Backstage, away from the audience, he breaks down. The camera catches him crying. Not a single photogenic tear, but the kind of raw, exhausted emotional release that comes from carrying a role for so long that the carrier forgets he's also allowed to set it down. The members' response to that moment was immediate and unperformed. They didn't look surprised. They moved toward him the way people do when they've seen this before and know exactly what it means. It was a quiet confirmation of something the group has never had to state explicitly. The person who holds everyone else up is also someone who needs to be held, and they knew that long before any camera was pointed at them. When J-Hope became the first BTS member to enlist for mandatory military service in April 2023, he did it without drama, without a prolonged public farewell tour, and without trying to delay the inevitable. He went first. The others followed in the months after, each on their own timeline, but all within the same chapter. His decision to lead that process mirrored the role he had always played, not the loudest voice in the room on matters of strategy, but the first one to move when movement was needed, trusting the others to follow because they always had. The kid from Gwangju who almost got cut before the first album was ever pressed ended up being the person without whom BTS's identity simply does not function. But if J-Hope was the emotional engine the group almost lost, the next member is the one who had to build himself into a leader before he even understood what that word would come to mean, and the cost of that responsibility nearly broke him more than once.
Number 5. The first one in the room and the last one allowed to break. RM. Before there was a group, before there was a name, before 6 other people entered the picture, there was Kim Namjoon sitting in a big-hit entertainment studio that most people in the Korean music industry wouldn't have looked twice at. He was the foundation. Not in a symbolic sense, literally. Bang Shi-hyuk, the producer and founder of Big Hit, discovered Namjoon through the underground rap scene, where the teenager was performing under the name Runch Randa and building a reputation that had caught the attention of people who had no interest in idol music. Bang's original concept was a hip-hop group, something raw and lyric-driven that would stand apart from the polished pop machinery dominating K-pop. He signed Namjoon as the cornerstone of that project and began assembling trainees around him. What happened next is a detail that rarely gets the weight it deserves when people talk about BTS's bond. The original trainees left. Not 1 or 2. The early lineup that was supposed to form the group around Namjoon dissolved almost entirely. People quit, people were cut, the concept shifted, and through all of that turnover, Namjoon stayed. He stayed in a company that was in financial trouble, building a group that didn't have a stable roster, working toward a debut with no guaranteed date and no guarantee of an audience. When the current 6 members arrived over the following months and years, Jin, Suga, J-Hope, Jimin, V, Jungkook, they weren't walking into an established team. They were walking into a room where one person had already weathered the uncertainty alone, and that person was now expected to lead them. Namjoon was not trained to be a leader. He was a rapper. He wrote lyrics, he studied language and philosophy, he consumed books at a pace the other members have joked about for years. His IQ has been reported at 148, and he taught himself English largely by watching the American sitcom Friends with Korean subtitles, then without them, a method that sounds like an anecdote until you watch him address the United Nations General Assembly in fluent English in 2018, standing in front of world leaders at 24 years old, speaking on behalf of a generation. But none of that intellectual capacity came with a manual for managing 6 distinct personalities in a pressure cooker environment, where financial survival, creative direction, public image, and personal relationships all collided daily. The early years tested him in ways the public didn't fully see until much later. Inside the dorm and the practice room, Namjoon was the bridge between the company and the members. When Big Hit made decisions the group didn't agree with,
He was the one who had to communicate both directions, translating corporate logic to frustrated artists and translating artistic frustration to executives who were trying to keep the lights on. When conflicts arose between members, and they did, because 7 young men sharing a single room and an uncertain future is a recipe for friction, Namjoon was expected to mediate. Not because he was the oldest, Jin held that position. Not because he was the most emotionally expressive, that role belonged to others. He mediated because he was the leader. And in the structure of a K-pop group, the leader carries a specific and often crushing set of responsibilities that the audience rarely sees in full. He's been honest about what that cost him. In interviews spanning years, Namjoon has described periods of deep self-doubt, moments where the pressure of representing the group and making decisions that affected 6 other people's lives made him question whether he was the right person for the role. He didn't have the luxury of expressing that doubt freely because the team looked to him for stability. The underground hip-hop community he came from made it worse when BTS debuted as an idol group rather than the raw hip-hop act some had expected. Namjoon faced direct criticism from former peers who accused him of selling out. He absorbed that publicly while simultaneously trying to build something with 6 people who were counting on him to know what he was doing. But the moment that crystallized Namjoon's role in the bond and the bond's role in saving the group came in 2018. BTS had already broken through internationally. They had Billboard hits, sold-out arenas, a fan base that was rewriting the rules of the music industry. From the outside, they were untouchable. From the inside, they were fracturing. During their annual Festa celebration that year, the group sat down together for a conversation that was filmed and released to the public. And what emerged was something idol groups almost never admit on camera. They had considered disbanding. The pressure, the exhaustion, the loss of individual identity within the machinery of global fame, it had pushed them to a breaking point. And it was Namjoon who forced the conversation into the open, not by delivering a leadership speech or performing authority, but by being the first to say honestly that things were not okay. That act, the willingness to crack the surface when everyone else might have kept performing normalcy, is the thread that runs through Namjoon's entire relationship with the group. He understood, perhaps earlier than any of them, that the bond they had couldn't survive on silence. It needed confrontation, not the aggressive kind, but the kind where people sit in a room and say the true thing instead of the comfortable thing. The conversation that followed became one of the most significant moments in BTS's history. They talked through what was wrong, they listened, and when it was over, all 7 of them made the decision to re-sign with Big Hit, not because the contract was the best financial option available to each of them individually, but because they chose the group. Namjoon didn't make that choice for them. He made the space where the choice could happen. That's the difference between a leader who commands and a leader who builds. And it's the reason the other 6 members have, consistently and without contradiction across hundreds of hours of recorded content, identified Namjoon as the person who kept BTS from becoming just another group that burned bright and disappeared. His solo work reflects the same depth. His mixtapes, RM and Mono, explored loneliness, identity, and the gap between public persona and private self with a specificity that made clear he wasn't performing introspection for content. He was processing it in real time, in front of an audience, because that was the only way he knew how to carry what he was carrying. When his solo album Indigo arrived in 2022, just before the military enlistment period began, it read like a letter from someone who had finally made peace with the contradictions of his position. The underground rapper who became a global idol, the reluctant leader who turned out to be exactly the leader the group needed, the person who held 6 others together while quietly wondering who was holding him. The answer, as it turned out, was all 6 of them, just not always in ways he could see while he was in the middle of it. But if Namjoon was the one who kept the group talking when silence would have ended everything, the next member is the one who almost never made it into the conversation at all, a last-minute addition whose arrival changed the entire emotional architecture of BTS in ways nobody predicted.
Number 4, the hidden boy from Jocheon. Kim Taehyung was not supposed to be at the audition. Born in Daegu and raised by his grandparents in rural Gyeochang, his childhood was defined by agriculture, saxophone lessons, and a quiet life far removed from the entertainment industry. In 2011, he accompanied a friend to a big hit audition in Daegu simply to show support, with no intention of participating himself. A casting director noticed him standing in the hallway, encouraged him to try out, and after obtaining permission from his parents, Taehyung performed on the spot. He was the only applicant from the Daegu auditions to pass that day, entering the agency as a trainee in September of that year. Yet, when he arrived at the dorms, his status was different from the others. For reasons tied to Big Hit's marketing strategy, Taehyung was designated as the group's hidden member. While the other 6 trainees were introduced to the public through video logs, social media updates, and promotional content, Taehyung had to remain completely out of sight. For nearly 2 years, he lived in the same dorm, trained in the same basement, and ate the same meals, but whenever a camera was turned on to document the group's journey, he was forced to step out of the frame. He has recalled standing next to trash cans or hiding behind walls during video shoots, watching his friends speak to an audience he was not allowed to acknowledge, wondering if he would ever actually be permitted to debut. The isolation was not just physical. It was psychological, testing the resolve of a teenager who had left his home to pursue a dream that felt invisible to the rest of the world. The company kept him hidden until the release of the first teaser images in June 2013, just days before their official debut. The sudden reveal was a shock to the public, But inside the dorms, it was the end of a long silent endurance test that the other members had helped him navigate. They had kept his secret, included him in their private routines, and ensured he felt like an equal partner in the group, even when the public had no idea he existed. This early experience of forced anonymity shaped Taehyung's relationship with the group, grounding his loyalty in the people who saw him when the world was not allowed to. His musical contribution also presented a unique challenge. In a vocal line dominated by high tenors like Jimin and Jin, Taehyung possessed a deep, soulful baritone. In the early days, K-pop trends heavily favored high-pitched vocals, and fitting his natural range into the hip-hop and electronic tracks of their early albums required constant adjustment. The group's producers and members worked to find a balance, allowing his deep tone to become a stabilizing anchor in tracks like Singularity and Stigma, which showcased a jazz-influenced R&B style that diverged from typical idol music. But Taehyung's integration into the group was not just about music, it was about emotional alignment. Known for his free-spirited, eccentric personality, he often processed situations differently from his more structured bandmates. This difference occasionally led to friction, most famously documented in what the members refer to as the dumpling incident. In 2016, during a grueling schedule that combined rehearsals with Taehyung's acting debut in the historical drama Warang, The Poet-Warrior Youth, tension boiled over. Exhausted from balancing late-night filming with intense choreography sessions, Taehyung wanted to eat dumplings immediately during a brief break, while Jimin insisted they finish the practice first. The argument escalated, leading to a temporary cold shoulder between the two same-age friends. The incident, which seems trivial on the surface, became a critical point of growth for the group. Instead of ignoring the conflict or letting management intervene, Taehyung and Jimin met at a park after hours, talking through their frustrations until they understood each other's stress. This small dispute eventually inspired their duet song Friends, on the Map of the Soul 7 album, transforming a minor clash over food into a public testament to their maturity. The members did not try to change Taehyung's unconventional approach to life. Instead, they accommodated it, recognizing that his unique perspective brought a necessary balance to their otherwise highly disciplined routine. This protective dynamic was tested to its limit in late 2016. During promotions for Blood, Sweat and Tears, Taehyung's grandmother, who had raised him for 14 years and whom he regarded as a parent, passed away. The timing was brutal. The group was under intense public scrutiny, preparing for major end-of-year award shows and performing daily. Taehyung kept the loss private for weeks, continuing to perform on music shows with his signature stage presence while grieving behind the scenes. The other members shielded him, taking over speaking roles in interviews and physically supporting him during transitions. It was not until their third muster concert at the Gocheok Sky Dome in November 2016 that Taehyung spoke about his grandmother's passing to the fans, breaking down in tears on stage. Before he could even finish his sentence, Jimin ran across the stage to embrace him, followed by the rest of the members. The moment was a raw, unscripted display of the safety net the group had constructed around each other. A real-time demonstration that their bond was not a promotional tool, but a survival mechanism. Taehyung's contribution to the BTS lexicon also redefined their global identity. During a fan meeting in 2016, looking at the purple lights illuminating the stadium, he spontaneously coined the phrase "Borhi" or "I purple you," explaining that purple is the last color of the rainbow, signifying that they would trust and love each other for a long time. The phrase was not part of any marketing campaign, yet it spread globally, eventually being adopted by UNICEF, major corporate partners, and landmarks like the Empire State Building and the Eiffel Tower, which lit up in purple to honor the group. For Taehyung, who had spent his trainee years hidden in the shadows, the color became a symbol of visibility, a way to connect millions of people through a shared vocabulary of support. When the group faced the decision of whether to renew their contracts in 2018, Taehyung's decision was rooted in the same quiet trust he had placed in Namjoon and the others since his trainee days. Despite his growing interest in acting and fine arts, he chose to remain with the group, rejecting the standard path of pursuing individual stardom at the height of his popularity. His solo project Layover, released in 2023, reflected his personal musical tastes, lo-fi, jazz and R&B, but it was produced with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his place in the group was secure. When the time came for military service in late 2023, Taehyung applied for the Special Duty Team (SDT), a specialized counterterrorism unit known for its rigorous physical demands. His decision to join one of the military's most challenging units surprised many, but it mirrored the quiet determination he had shown since his days as the hidden member. He did not seek an easy path, just as he had not sought an easy entry into the group. Through every phase of their journey, Taehyung remained the unpredictable element that kept the group's bond from becoming formulaic, proving that even the most quiet, unconventional beginnings can lead to an unbreakable connection. Yet, the emotional foundation of the group did not just rely on those who stood in the shadows. It also required someone who was willing to push their physical limits to the absolute edge to prove they belonged in the room in the first place. Leading directly to the member. Number 3, the dancer who slept 2 hours a day, Jimin. Park Jimin arrived at the Big Hit Entertainment dorms in May 2012, with only 1 year left before the group's scheduled debut. Unlike the other members who had been training together for years, Jimin was a late addition, selected after his modern dance teacher in Busan suggested he audition for the agency. He had been the top student in the modern dance department at Busan High School of Arts, trained in fluid, expressive movements that utilized a completely different set of muscles and center of gravity than the sharp, hip-hop choreography Big Hit was developing. This technical gap became his first major hurdle. When he began practicing with the group, his body naturally leaned into modern dance postures, which did not align with the hip-hop style required for their debut track, No More Dream. The transition was physically taxing and mentally exhausting. Jimin has since admitted in multiple documentaries, including Break the Silence, that he was on the verge of being eliminated from the group's lineup multiple times, by his count, about 8 or 9 times throughout his trainee year. The uncertainty was constant. He was told repeatedly that he did not fit the group's concept, and that his vocals were not developed enough to secure a position. The physical dorm itself was a cramped space where all 7 members shared a single room, sleeping in bunk beds and on floor mats, which made it impossible for Jimin to hide his struggles. In response to this pressure, Jimin developed a work ethic that became legendary among the trainees. He began sleeping only 2 to 3 hours a night, practicing in the dance studio until 4 in the morning, and returning to the dorms briefly before waking up at 6 to practice vocals in the communal restroom so he wouldn't disturb the sleeping members. He pushed his body to physical extremes, skipping meals to lose weight under the belief that his appearance was holding the group back. The other members witnessed this grueling routine daily, and their response defined the emerging culture of the group. Instead of letting him isolate himself, they intervened. Jin regularly dragged him out of the practice room to ensure he ate, while J-Hope, as the dance leader, spent extra hours after midnight helping Jimin adjust his balance and technique to master the hip-hop routines. RM reinforced his worth to the team, telling him that his unique high vocal register was essential to the identity of the group. This collective defense of Jimin's place in the lineup established a precedent. The members refused to let the company's evaluation dictate who stayed. They chose to carry him through the learning curve, prioritizing his dedication over immediate perfection. By the time of their debut in June 2013, Jimin had not only secured his spot, but had also established himself as one of the group's visual and performance anchors. His modern dance background, once a liability, became a signature asset, allowing the group to incorporate complex, contemporary elements into their routines, culminating in his solo performance of Lie during the Wings era. The song, which dealt with his internal battles with insecurity and the feeling of being trapped in a lie, showcased a level of theatrical expression that set the group's performances apart on global stages. During his trainee days before the agency finally accepted his vocal range, Jimin had to constantly adjust his throat muscles to hit notes that were not natural to him, often causing temporary loss of voice. He would practice his vocal runs during short breaks, repeating the same lines hundreds of times. This absolute dedication extended to his solo work like Serendipity, a track written by RM who specifically crafted the lyrics to match Jimin's soft, gender-neutral vocal tone, resulting in a song that received praise for its unique warmth. When he performed this song on the Love Yourself World Tour, his choreography involved a transparent bubble, a concept that required precise physical control to maintain the aesthetic without sacrificing the live vocal delivery. Yet, his drive for perfection did not decrease with success. During the 2016 promotions for Blood, Sweat and Tears, Jimin followed an extreme diet that led to him collapsing during dance rehearsals, a struggle he documented in the Wings concept book. The members responded by monitoring his health closely, refusing to let him practice alone, and sharing their own vulnerabilities to help him ease his self-imposed pressure. This protective circle allowed Jimin to gradually move away from destructive habits, transitioning his intensity into a source of support for the others. He became the member who was always the first to notice when someone else was struggling on stage or in interviews, physically moving to comfort them, a role he maintained throughout their rise to global fame. This empathy was particularly visible in his relationship with V, his same-age friend. During their long years as roommates, Jimin and V navigated the transition from teenagers to adults together, establishing a dynamic where they could communicate without words during high-pressure situations. Their joint track Friends documented this history, referencing their shared struggles and the pledge they made to continue performing together, even after their youth faded. When the group faced the prospect of disbandment in 2018 due to creative exhaustion, a crisis that was publicly revealed by Jin during their emotional acceptance speech at the Net Asian Music Awards in Hong Kong, Jimin's focus remained on keeping the members connected, advocating for open dialogues where they could air their grievances without fear of judgment. His solo career further proved his artistic maturity. In April 2023, he released his debut solo album Face, with the lead single Like Crazy making history by reaching #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, making him the first South Korean solo artist to achieve this feat. The achievement was a direct result of the vocal and performance foundation he had spent a decade building, but his reaction was characteristic. He immediately went live to thank his bandmates, attributing his success to the standard they had set together. During the recording of this album, Jimin experienced significant creative anxiety, but the other members frequently visited the studio, offering feedback and reassurance that helped him finalize the project. When the enlistment period arrived in late 2023, Jimin chose to enlist alongside Jungkook through the military's companion soldier system, entering the 5th Infantry Division together. The decision was practical and symbolic, ensuring that even during their mandatory service, they would not be isolated. From a trainee who was nearly cut 8 times to a history-making solo artist, Jimin's journey was defined by a refusal to quit, supported by a group that refused to let him go. The physical toll he exacted on himself was matched only by the emotional labor of the members who refused to let him fail, creating a bond that was forged in the fire of shared exhaustion. This mutual reliance ensured that when the spotlight grew blindingly bright, they had already survived the darkest corners of their own self-doubt together. But while Jimin's path was defined by physical and vocal labor to fit into the group, the next member's entry was marked by a quiet, almost reluctant transition from a cynical underground producer to a man who would write the very soul of the group's pain and survival. Number 2, the producer who traded his shadow for a stage, Suga. Min Yoongi did not join Big Hit Entertainment to become an idol. In 2010, the 17-year-old from Daegu was already working under the name Gloss, producing beats and rapping in the underground hip-hop crew D-Town. He entered Big Hit's first Hit It audition not to join a dance group, but to secure a position as a producer and songwriter. When he won second place and signed with the company, producer Bang Si-hyuk assured him that he would be placed in a group similar to One to Him, where he would focus solely on writing and rap, with no dance choreography required. Yoongi has frequently joked on their variety shows that he was tricked into joining the idol training regimen, but the reality behind his decision to stay was far more complex. His family did not support his pursuit of music, leaving him financially isolated in Seoul. During his trainee years, Yoongi faced extreme poverty, often forced to choose between spending his remaining 2001 on a basic bowl of black bean noodles, or using it to pay for the bus ride back to the dorm, which meant walking hours through the cold. To cover his expenses and tuition, he took a part-time job as a delivery driver. In 2012, while making a delivery on his motorcycle, he was struck by a car in a hit-and-run accident. The crash dislocated his shoulder and tore the labrum. Fearing that the agency would dismiss him if they discovered he was working outside jobs and was physically injured, Yoongi hid the accident from the company and the other trainees for months, continuing to practice complex choreography despite intense pain. When the physical strain became too obvious to hide, he finally confessed to the staff. Instead of cutting him, Big Hit paid for his medical treatment and covered his school tuition fees, allowing him to leave the delivery job and focus entirely on training. This intervention cemented Yoongi's loyalty to the company and the team, proving that he was valued as a person rather than a replaceable asset. However, the shoulder injury remained a chronic issue, causing him constant pain during tours and rehearsals for the next 8 years, until he finally underwent corrective surgery in November 2020. The decision to have surgery meant missing promotions for the album B, a choice the members supported by leaving an empty space for him in choreographies, and even carrying a life-size hologram of him on stage at the Net Asian Music Awards. Yoongi's contribution to the group's bond was defined by his pragmatic, quiet style of support. He was the member who observed the dorm dynamics from a distance, stepped in to resolve disputes with logical analysis rather than emotion, and fixed broken appliances around the house. His relationship with RM was particularly deep. Having lived together in the dorm since 2010, they had the longest-running partnership in the group. Despite their different approaches to music, RM being analytical and philosophy-driven, Yoongi being raw and instinctive, they formed the creative core of the rap line, co-writing the tracks that defined the group's early social commentary. Yoongi also extended his protective nature to the younger members. During their trainee days when Jungkook was homesick and Jimin was practicing past exhaustion, Yoongi would buy them food or write long, encouraging text messages that ended with "I love you," a phrase he rarely spoke aloud. He did this quietly, often leaving the food on their desks or sending the text after he had already left the room to avoid emotional awkwardness. During the group's early American Hustle Life series in 2014, when they were sent to Los Angeles to learn hip-hop culture under harsh conditions, Yoongi was the one who kept the group focused, reminding them that the difficulties they faced were temporary compared to the opportunity to perform. His studio, which he named the Genius Lab, became a sanctuary not just for his own production, but for any member who needed a quiet space to discuss their worries away from the cameras. He established a rule that only those with the entry code could enter, yet he shared that code with all 6 members, ensuring they always had access to him. His solo project under the alias August D allowed him to address his personal struggles with depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and social anxiety with a level of honesty that was rare in the K-pop industry. In the track The Last from his 2016 mixtape, he detailed the exact moment he visited a psychiatrist with his parents, translating his private pain into a public narrative that resonated with millions of fans worldwide. By showing his own scars, Yoongi gave the other members the freedom to be vulnerable in their own music, establishing authenticity as a core value of the group's brand. During their 2018 contract discussions, when the pressure of their global success threatened to break the group, Yoongi's perspective was crucial. Having experienced poverty and physical injury, he viewed their sudden fame with a critical eye, helping the members ground themselves and focus on their music, rather than the industry's expectations. In 2023, before his military enlistment, Yoongi embarked on his first solo world tour, the August D Tour D-Day, performing in arenas across North America and Asia. The tour was a massive success, but its defining moments occurred when his bandmates showed up at different stops. Jimin, V, and Jungkook stood in the audience to support him, while RM and J-Hope joined him on stage to perform, demonstrating that even during individual projects, their collective identity remained intact. When the final tour stop in Seoul concluded, Yoongi showed the audience a small tattoo of the number 7 on his shoulder, the exact location of his 2012 injury and subsequent surgery. The placement was deliberate, transforming the site of his greatest physical pain and secret shame into a permanent symbol of his connection to the other 6 members. In September 2023, Yoongi enlisted for his mandatory service as a social service agent, a placement determined by the medical history of his shoulder. His departure was quiet, marked by a brief message to fans and a private farewell from the members. From a cynical underground rapper who was promised he wouldn't have to dance, to a producer who wore his injuries as a badge of honor, Yoongi's presence in BTS was the anchor that kept the group's feet on the ground even as their heads were in the clouds. Yet, the final piece of the puzzle did not come from the rappers who built the foundation, but from the oldest member who walked into the dorm with zero musical training, only to become the shield that protected them all. Number 1. The shield who chose to stay behind. Jin. Kim Seokjin did not plan to be a musician. Scouted on the street while stepping off a bus on his way to classes at Konkuk University, where he was majoring in acting, he was brought into Big Hit Entertainment based entirely on his visual appeal. Years earlier he had been approached by a casting agent from SM Entertainment, but he had fled the encounter, believing it to be a scam. When Big Hit approached him, he decided to take the opportunity, intending to use the experience to bolster his acting credentials. When he entered the trainee dorm in 2012, he had zero training in singing, dancing, or songwriting. He was dropped into a room with teenagers who had spent years mastering hip-hop, underground rap, and street dance. The learning curve was brutal. Jin spent hours alone in practice rooms, repeating basic vocal scales and choreographic steps that the younger trainees could execute in minutes. He has recalled crying in his room out of sheer frustration at his inability to keep up with the physical demands of their training. The vocal coaches initially struggled to adapt his theatrical spoken word acting delivery into the high-pitched pop register required for the group's discography. To overcome this, Jin spent years training his vocal cords, eventually developing a powerful tenor range capable of executing the demanding triple high notes in tracks like Crystal Snow and the emotional belts of his solo track Epiphany. His acting training at Konkuk University eventually became a critical tool for the group's live performances. Unlike singers who focus solely on vocal production, Jin understood how to use physical posture, facial expressions, and spatial awareness to project emotional narratives to the back rows of massive stadiums. His signature performance of Epiphany, where he played the piano live while delivering a monologue-like vocal build-up, was a direct application of his theatrical education, proving that his non-traditional path into the industry was not a deficit, but a unique asset. Yet, his most significant contribution to the group's bond had nothing to do with musical metrics. It was his decision to redefine the role of the oldest member. In South Korean society, age hierarchy carries immense social authority, and the oldest member of a group is typically expected to assert authority and lead. Jin deliberately chose to waive this cultural privilege. Recognizing RM's tenure and natural communication skills, Jin stepped aside to let the younger trainee lead the group, actively submitting to RM's directions during meetings and practices. By doing so, he eliminated the potential for power struggles that have historically fractured many K-pop groups. During the years when they shared a single bedroom, Jin and Suga established a roommate dynamic built on total boundary respect. In a dorm filled with high-energy teenagers, they were the two oldest, forming a silent agreement to never interfere with each other's personal spaces or routines. They communicated in quiet nods and short sentences, creating a peaceful oasis where they could mentally recharge away from the constant noise of training and media schedules. This mutual understanding prevented the friction that often arises when introverts are forced to live in close quarters, showing the other members that closeness did not require constant interaction. Instead of using his age to command respect, he used it to create a protective space. During their trainee days, when the company's financial instability meant limited food budgets, Jin brought ingredients from his parents' home and cooked meals for the younger trainees. He regularly prepared traditional feasts during holidays like Lunar New Year and Chuseok, when the trainees were unable to travel home to their families. He drove Jungkook to school, bought Jimin meals when he was starving himself, and acted as an emotional buffer between the younger members and the pressure of their training. When Jin was unable to attend his university graduation ceremony at Konkuk University in 2017 due to an overseas schedule at the Billboard Music Awards, the members did not let the milestone pass unnoticed. They organized a surprise graduation ceremony inside their practice studio, purchasing a cap and gown, presenting him with a bouquet of flowers, and broadcasting the event live to their fans. The gesture demonstrated that their commitment to each other went beyond the stage, ensuring that none of them had to sacrifice their personal milestones for the sake of the collective career. He chose to play the role of the self-deprecating, cheerful Hyung, making dad jokes and declaring himself worldwide handsome, to break the tension during stressful promotions. He has explained that by lowering his own guard and refusing to take himself too seriously, he created an environment where the other members felt safe to drop their own defenses. This emotional labor kept the group grounded as they transitioned from small venues to global stadiums. However, his greatest test came with the issue of mandatory military service. As the oldest member, born in 1992, Jin was the first in line to enlist. For years, the group's enlistment was the subject of intense public and political debate in South Korea, with politicians arguing over whether BTS should receive special exemptions due to their economic and cultural contributions. The group was placed in a difficult position, unable to speak freely while the public debated their patriotism and duty. Throughout this multi-year debate, Jimin remained silent, refusing to let the political noise affect the group's schedule. In October 2022, following their massive yet-to-come concert in Busan, he unilaterally resolved the issue by announcing he would withdraw his request to delay his service and enlist immediately. He released his solo single The Astronaut, co-written with Coldplay, as a farewell gift to fans, and entered the military in December 2022 as an active duty soldier. On the day of his enlistment at the Yongkyeon Training Center, all 6 members gathered to send him off, posing for photos while touching his shaved head, a quiet tradition they would repeat for every subsequent enlistment. Jimin did not ask for special treatment, eventually earning the rank of Special Warrior and serving as an assistant training instructor at the 5th Infantry Division boot camp, the same division where Jimin and Jungkook would later be stationed. His decisive action ended the political debate and set the timeline for the rest of the group to enlist, ensuring they could complete their service and reunite as planned. When Jimin was discharged in June 2024, he was met outside the military gates by his bandmates, with RM famously playing their hit song Dynamite on a saxophone in celebration. He immediately returned to public activities, hosting a fan hug event the day after his release to fulfill a promise he had made before enlisting. His return marked the beginning of the group's reunion phase, acting once again as the anchor who stayed behind to welcome the others back. By refusing to let his lack of initial training define his limit, and by choosing to serve his members rather than rule them, Jimin built the structural integrity of the group. The bond that makes BTS inseparable is not the result of a corporate contract or a shared marketing strategy. It is the direct consequence of 7 individuals who repeatedly chose the team over themselves, proving that the strongest shield is the one that is held together by all 7 hands.